What remains of us when we stop fighting? Not in the sense of surrendering to another person, but in that quiet, invisible way in which we give up on life itself. Think of those mornings when you wake up already exhausted, when the thought of getting out of bed feels heavier than the world itself. You tell yourself, what's the point? Why keep trying if nothing ever changes? That moment, silent, private, unnoticed by others, marks the beginning of something dangerous. It is not the body that collapses first, but the will. We have all seen people walking through life like shadows of themselves. They laugh, but without sparkle. They work, but without purpose. They move, but without direction. And maybe, if we are honest, we have also caught ourselves drifting into that same fog. Have you ever felt as though you were present but not really alive? That sensation is more than fatigue. It is resignation, the subtle act of surrendering before the battle has even finished. But here lies the paradox. Sometimes we stop fighting not because life is too difficult, but because we have lost sight of why we were fighting in the first place. Viktor Frankl, a man who endured unimaginable suffering in a concentration camp, once said that those who lost their why quickly lost the strength to survive. It was not pain itself that destroyed them, but the absence of meaning. This insight cuts deep, because it suggests that despair is not the result of circumstances alone, but of the story we tell ourselves about those circumstances. So let me ask you, in your own life, when was the last time you noticed yourself withdrawing silently, giving up not in words, but in spirit? What part of you is being lost each time you stop showing up to the struggle? Perhaps the real question is not, what is the point of continuing, but rather, what is left of me if I don't? Before we dive into Frankl's wisdom, I want you to hold on to this thought. Resignation may feel like relief, but it erases the very core of who you are. If this resonates with you, leave a comment below sharing a moment when you felt on the edge of giving up. Your story might be the mirror someone else needs. And if you believe in this kind of conversation, don't forget to like this video and subscribe, because together we're exploring the kind of truth that can actually set us free. What if surrendering to despair is not the end of the story? What if it is actually the fork in the road where another possibility begins? Imagine for a moment that instead of giving in to that heavy silence, you chose to ask yourself one different question. What could grow out of this struggle if I didn't walk away? Suddenly, the same pain that once felt like an enemy starts to look like raw material, waiting to be shaped into something meaningful. Picture this. You are standing in front of a locked door. You push, pull, try the handle a dozen times and nothing moves. Most of us give up right there. But what if instead of turning away, you realize that the real treasure wasn't behind that door at all? It was hidden in the act of persisting, in discovering another path, in refusing to let the locked door define your limits. This is not about naive optimism. It is about discovering that meaning often reveals itself only after we refuse to resign. Frankl believed that human beings are not destroyed by suffering itself, but by the loss of hope that suffering can be redeemed. If pain is inevitable, then despair is optional. And if despair is optional, then so is renewal. Just imagine what your days would feel like if you held to that conviction, not denying the weight of your struggles, but carrying them as proof that your life still matters, that you are still in the fight. So let me ask you, what would change in your life if you truly believed that every hardship could be transformed into strength? How differently would you show up to your relationships, your work, even to yourself? Most of us live as though difficulties are interruptions to life. But what if they are the very fabric of life, the places where meaning waits to be discovered? This simple shift in imagination, from resignation to perseverance, can be the difference between merely surviving and actually living. Here's a practical step. The next time you feel like giving up on something important, pause and ask yourself not why me, but what might this be shaping in me? Write that question down somewhere visible. Train your imagination to project not only the pain of the moment, but also the possible fruit of persistence. Because sometimes, when we imagine another ending, we find the courage to write it into existence. Most of us grew up hearing a simple story. When life gets unbearable, maybe the wisest thing to do is to step back, stop struggling, and let things unfold. Time heals everything, they say. But let's be honest. Time alone heals nothing. Wounds unattended fester. Silence unbroken grows heavier. And surrender, when disguised as acceptance, can quietly steal the essence of who we are. The belief that quitting is peace is one of the most dangerous lies we tell ourselves. Here is the disruptive truth. Giving up is not neutral. It does not simply freeze life where it is. It reshapes you, rewrites you. Each time you retreat when something demands your courage, you are not just avoiding pain. You are practicing disappearance. And with every small act of resignation, you become less of yourself, more like a hollow outline of the person you once intended to be. That is why Frankl insisted that meaning is not discovered in comfort, but in confrontation with suffering. When we step away from the fight, we step away from the very arena where meaning is forged. Think of it this way. Storms do not only test the strength of a tree, they make the tree stronger, forcing its roots deeper into the soil. A tree that never faces wind grows tall but fragile. The same applies to us. Without resistance, we may feel safe, but safety without struggle breeds weakness. The world tells us to avoid pain, but philosophy and experience whisper a harder truth. Avoiding pain often costs us our soul. So ask yourself, what is the cost of your quiet resignations? Where in your life have you traded authenticity for ease? You may have convinced yourself that you let it go, but deep down you know you gave it up. And that act leaves a scar, not because you failed, but because you chose not to fight at all. Here lies the shock we resist facing. The absence of struggle does not equal peace. It equals emptiness. Peace is not the absence of conflict. It is the fruit of confronting conflict and finding meaning through it. What remains of us when we stop fighting is not serenity, it is vacancy. And perhaps that is the one fate worse than suffering itself, becoming a bystander in the story of your own life. To understand why surrender is so destructive, we need to lean on a voice that lived through the darkest expression of human suffering. Viktor Frankl, psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor, endured years in Nazi concentration camps where he lost his parents, his wife, and nearly everything that gave life comfort. In those inhuman conditions, many prisoners died not just from starvation or disease, but from hopelessness. They gave up the inner fight before their bodies gave up the outer one. Frankl observed something radical. Survival was not primarily determined by physical strength, but by inner orientation. Those who held on to a sense of purpose, whether it was the hope of reuniting with loved ones, finishing an unfinished work, or simply proving that cruelty would not destroy their dignity, were far more likely to endure. Meaning became more essential than food, more sustaining than rest. He later called this the will to meaning, a force he believed was stronger than the will to pleasure or even the will to power. This insight reshapes our everyday struggles. You don't need to be in a concentration camp to feel the temptation to surrender. The same dynamic plays out in our workplaces, marriages, health battles, and silent personal wars. We think we are defeated by circumstances, but Frankl shows us a deeper truth. We are often defeated by the collapse of meaning inside those circumstances. And this is not just philosophical poetry. It's been echoed in psychology ever since. Research on resilience consistently shows that people who frame their suffering within a larger purpose are less likely to fall into despair. Neuroscience even suggests that when we attach meaning to pain, the brain processes it differently, making it more bearable. In other words, purpose literally rewires our capacity to endure. So, when Frankl tells us that those who have a why to live can bear almost any how, he is not offering abstract comfort. He is diagnosing the core of human endurance. The real question is not, how much can I take, but why should I take it? Without a why, the fight feels meaningless. With a why, even unbearable suffering can be carried with dignity. So pause and reflect. What is your why right now? If you cannot name it, you are vulnerable to resignation. But if you can, even in the smallest form, you carry within you the seed of survival. Here is the unsettling truth. Resignation rarely happens in one dramatic collapse. It usually creeps in quietly, disguised as small daily compromises. We tell ourselves, it's not worth it today, or I'll try again tomorrow. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, those tomorrows never arrive. What looks like a harmless pause becomes a permanent retreat. And the tragedy is that we often do not notice the moment our spirit begins to fade. Think about the times you have seen someone lose their spark. They stop laughing as freely. They avoid conversations about their dreams. They move through life as though each day is only something to be survived, not lived. From the outside, nothing dramatic happened. But inside, they surrendered bit by bit, until the person they once were is no longer recognizable. And sometimes, if we are brutally honest, we realize we are describing ourselves. Frankl saw this pattern in the camps. Prisoners who stopped cleaning themselves, who refused food, who lay on the bunk staring at nothing. Those small withdrawals were not random. They were signals that meaning had collapsed. In our modern lives, it might look like avoiding calls from friends, neglecting passions, or surrendering to habits that numb rather than heal. On the surface, these are minor acts. But collectively, they are a rehearsal for disappearance. The invisible problem is that resignation feels deceptively safe. It tells us, if you stop trying, you can stop hurting. But the cost of this false comfort is steep. We lose our sense of dignity, of authorship over our own lives. And the paradox is that the very pain we try to escape returns in another form: emptiness. Suffering without meaning may crush us, but emptiness without struggle quietly erases us. So here is a reflection worth holding. Where in your life are you subtly withdrawing? What habits, excuses, or silences are training you to give up before the fight is finished? If you can name those patterns, you can begin to resist them. If you remain blind to them, they will slowly undo you. The invitation is not to shame yourself, but to awaken. Because resignation does not announce itself with trumpets. It arrives quietly, in whispers, asking you to trade the weight of pain for the illusion of ease. And every time you agree, a piece of you goes missing. Sometimes the truth needs to be heard not as an explanation, but as a sharp, unforgettable strike, something that cuts through excuses and lingers. Let these words settle in you. Quitting does not protect you from suffering. It only ensures that your suffering has no meaning. Every time you stop fighting, you are not just avoiding pain. You are surrendering a piece of your soul. Resignation feels like relief in the moment, but it turns into emptiness in the long run. You are not destroyed by what happens to you, but by the story you tell yourself about what happens. Peace is not found in escape. It is born in confrontation. When you lose your why, you do not simply lose motivation, you begin to lose yourself. Silence can heal, but it can also suffocate when it hides your surrender. Despair is not the presence of pain, it is the absence of purpose. These phrases are not just words to be remembered, they are reminders to be carried. The human mind clings to simplicity, to short declarations that can be repeated in moments of crisis. That is why soldiers memorize mottos, athletes chant mantras, and prisoners whisper prayers. They anchor the will when reason feels too weak. Which one of these truths speaks to you most today? Maybe it is the idea that giving up does not protect you but erases you. Or perhaps it is the haunting reminder that despair is not pain itself, but the absence of a reason to bear it. Whichever resonates, let it echo inside you until it becomes your inner resistance against resignation. Try this. Choose one of these statements and write it somewhere you will see it daily. On your phone wallpaper, a sticky note, or even your bathroom mirror. When the temptation to give up arises, speak it out loud. Let it confront you. Because often, the battle is not won by overwhelming effort, but by a single clear sentence repeated at the right moment. A phrase strong enough to hold you until your deeper why comes back into focus. Life often confronts us with truths that seem contradictory. One of the greatest paradoxes about suffering is this: the very thing we run from is often the very thing that gives us strength. We believe peace comes from avoiding struggle, yet in reality, peace often grows only after we have endured it. We think freedom is the absence of responsibility, yet true freedom is found when we embrace responsibility fully. These paradoxes may sound uncomfortable, but they hold the keys to genuine maturity. Frankl saw this clearly. Those who had nothing left but still chose to carry themselves with dignity discovered an inner freedom the guards could never touch. The paradox is stunning. While their external lives were stripped of every choice, internally they became more free than their oppressors. How? Because they chose meaning where others surrendered to despair. They showed that suffering can enslave the body but liberate the soul if we confront it with purpose. The same is true in ordinary life. Think of love. The more deeply you love, the more you open yourself to loss. Yet without love, life feels hollow. Or consider courage. It exists only in the presence of fear. Without fear, bravery has no meaning. The paradox of human existence is that our most cherished qualities, strength, resilience, compassion, are born in the soil of struggle we would rather avoid. This duality challenges the way most of us are taught to live. We are told to pursue comfort, avoid pain, and minimize risk. But what if the opposite is true? What if the very places we try to escape are the ones that shape us into who we were meant to be? The paradox is not meant to confuse you. It is meant to awaken you. Comfort without struggle breeds weakness. Struggle embraced with purpose breeds character. So let me ask you, where in your life are you running from the paradox? Are you avoiding responsibility because it feels heavy, forgetting that responsibility is also where meaning lives? Are you craving peace without realizing that peace is not the absence of conflict, but the fruit of facing it? Perhaps the most transformative shift you can make is not to escape these paradoxes, but to lean into them, trusting that they are not contradictions, but hidden doorways to growth. If everything we have explored so far sounds heavy, it is because life itself is heavy at times. But here is the promise hidden in the weight. When you refuse to give up, you do not only preserve yourself, you discover a depth of self you never knew existed. The reward of staying in the fight is not simply surviving. It is uncovering the strength and clarity that only struggle can reveal. Think about the people you most admire. Chances are, they are not the ones who lived easiest lives, but the ones who endured hardship with dignity. They carry a kind of presence, a quiet authority born not from theory but from having faced the abyss and walked out with meaning intact. That same presence is available to you, not as a gift but as a reward for refusing resignation. Frankl described meaning as something that does not erase suffering but transforms it. When you suffer for a purpose, the pain becomes bearable, even sacred. Imagine how differently your life would feel if every difficulty you face became fuel for becoming stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. The problems do not vanish, but you stop being crushed by them. Instead, you rise through them. The emotional reward is profound. By staying engaged in the struggle, you preserve dignity, self-respect, and the deep sense that your life matters. And the practical reward is equally powerful. Perseverance builds resilience, resilience builds confidence, and confidence becomes the foundation for courage in every new challenge. What begins as mere survival turns into transformation. So here is the invitation. The next time you are tempted to step back and surrender, remind yourself of the reward on the other side. Ask, what kind of person will I become if I keep going? Because the real victory is not only what you achieve, but who you become in the process. And perhaps the greatest promise of all is this: by refusing to give up, you do not just save yourself, you may also inspire someone else who is secretly on the verge of resignation. Your endurance can become their hope. To tie everything together, let's ground this reflection in a deeper conceptual framework. Viktor Frankl's philosophy, often called logotherapy, rests on a simple but profound idea. Human beings are not primarily driven by pleasure, as Freud suggested, nor by power, as Adler proposed, but by meaning. The need to find meaning is not a luxury for philosophers. It is the core engine of human resilience and growth. Logotherapy teaches that meaning can be discovered in three main ways. First, through creative work, what we bring into the world, whether it is a project, a piece of art, or even the way we raise a child. Second, through experiencing truth, beauty, or love. Those moments when we encounter something greater than ourselves, whether in nature, relationships, or art. And third, through the attitude we take toward suffering, choosing dignity, courage, and even gratitude in the face of what cannot be changed. This last path is the one most of us resist. We want to control, fix, and escape suffering. But Frankl insisted that when suffering is unavoidable, the way we respond to it can still hold meaning. That response, our inner posture, becomes the ultimate freedom no one can take from us. It is here, in this hidden interior choice, that the true battle of life is fought. Notice how this framework reshapes everything we've explored. When you give up, you are not just avoiding struggle. You are cutting yourself off from one of the deepest sources of meaning available to humans. When you persist, even in silence, you are not merely enduring, you are actively shaping your character and affirming your humanity. This explains why people who survive deep trials often speak of emerging with a clearer sense of who they are and what truly matters. So let's return to the question that started our journey. What remains of us when we stop fighting? The framework of logotherapy gives us a sober answer. What remains is emptiness, because meaning is abandoned in the very place where it was waiting to be found. But if we dare to stay, to fight, to endure, we discover not just survival but transformation. And that is the heartbeat of Frankl's legacy. Life always has meaning, especially in suffering, if we are willing to search for it. So we return to the question that began this journey. What remains of us when we stop fighting? The answer is painful but clear. When we give up, we lose not only the struggle, but also the very part of ourselves that could have been forged through it. Yet when we hold on, even trembling, even uncertain, we preserve dignity, we protect meaning, and we keep alive the flame of who we are meant to become. Frankl's voice echoes through the decades to remind us, suffering is not the enemy. The true enemy is the emptiness that comes when we surrender to despair. Meaning does not come as a reward for comfort. It is discovered in the tension of responsibility, in the courage to endure, and in the decision to keep standing when everything tempts us to collapse. To live is to fight, not against life, but within it, to claim significance in every circumstance. Now this is where I want to turn to you. Think about your own life. Where have you been tempted to resign quietly? What battle are you avoiding because it feels too heavy, too uncertain, too endless? And most importantly, what would it cost you, not in the short term, but in the depth of your being, if you stopped fighting there? Your answer matters because the meaning you draw from your struggle is not abstract. It is the anchor of your very existence. Here's my invitation. Share in the comments one area of your life where you are choosing not to give up. It could be a relationship, a personal goal, or simply the daily effort to keep going. By naming it, you not only strengthen your own resolve, you may also inspire someone else who is on the edge of resignation. Your story can become the spark that keeps another person alive in their fight. If this conversation resonated with you, I encourage you to like this video and subscribe to the channel. This community exists for those who want more than shallow encouragement. It is for those who seek depth, truth, and transformation. Together we can remind one another that life always holds meaning, even in the darkest nights. Because in the end, what remains of us when we refuse to surrender is not only survival, it is the possibility of becoming more human, more courageous, and more alive than we ever imagined.